So if you remember, at the beginning of the session, we always put forth our agenda. What are we going to cover this legislative session? And I think it helps us keep focused during the legislative session, because you and I know that a lot of people know us at the Capitol. They know a lot about AARP. They want our brand. They want us to be involved. They know that we can move policy issues forward, but we wanted to make sure that we were focused on the issues that were important, not just to our organization, but really the members at large, that these are the issues that we want you to focus on this session. So.
Well, let's move on and talk about housing. As you kind of outlined, Janelle, at the start, I think housing is growing in our bucket. We're hearing more and more about housing issues, housing concerns. I know a lot of folks are really concerned about how do they stay in their current home, or at a minimum in their community, but more specifically in their current home as they age. It's an issue that since I've worked at AARP for going on 14 years now, continually comes up in survey after survey. And so I think we had some really good enhancements in the Department of Health and Human Services. That takes a minute for me to get used to. It used to just be the Department of Human Services and the Department of Health. Now the Department of Health and Human Services. There was some really good enhancements, including this $1 million to remodel or rehab homes to become more age-friendly or accessible. And this really was born out of a work. You were on a task force under previous Governor Burgum to kind of start moving some of these housing initiatives forward. And this was kind of a subset of some of those recommendations. So anything else you want to talk about that? I mean, I was surprised. I will just pitch, before I pitch it to you, say I was a little surprised. You and I talked about this small pot of money, but I think an important pot of money, that it wasn't, especially when we got to the second half of the session and we thought they're going to start looking for places to cut. I thought this might be a place that might get put on the chopping block, and it never really got threatened. Why do you think that was?
It didn't. I think it's because it's part of an overall strategy to address housing. And I think by having it in different budgets within, because obviously Health and Human Services has a very different scope and a different role than Housing Finance or Department of Commerce. And I think why this one was so important is what I heard being part of that task force is we can't build our way out of this issue. That you can build as many houses as you want, but ultimately we need to look at the stock that's available. And you and I know people want to stay in their homes. And if there are ways, and I talked with Chairman John Nelson, he was the one that was looking at this part of the budget, and he told me, why is this so important? And I think what I told him was that you can have both. That yes, we need to build, but we also need to make sure that folks that want to stay there, that their houses are able to be remodeled, rehabbed, so it's accessible, they can stay there in that long term. And I think that's why they saw it as a complementary piece to the other housing incentive funds that they were doing. So
so I think that's appreciate your input on that. Like I said, I'm sure you got annoyed with me because I'm sure it was at least once or twice a week. The housing money, Janelle, do we need to worry about that housing money in the human services budget? No, Josh, I think it's in good shape, and happy to do that. The second then is money to support the North Dakota Housing Finance Agency, which is in the OMB budget, because I think, no, Industrial Commission. Thank you. I was like, no, that wasn't right. In the Industrial Commission budget, because the Industrial Commission oversees the North Dakota Housing Finance Agency. The Housing Incentive Fund, HIF, more affectionately known, Housing Incentive Fund. First of all, to establish that program is a huge success, and we were a part of it from when some of us didn't even work at this organization, getting it stood up. And there's 3 of us in this room sitting here that worked to get that established and get it up and running. And we've continued to push for additional resources. The money that goes into that Housing Incentive Fund is really to help, as it says on the slide, communities build more affordable housing. Affordability was kind of there. There's kind of this new twist about age-friendly housing now as well. Again, I think coming out of that task force work from last year. But we know that money usually, the minute it's allocated, gets snapped up like this. I do think it's important to just tell folks before we leave the housing area, we had success in housing, good success in housing. There's still a lot of work to be done in this housing space. Well, 26 million when you total them up sounds like a lot. It's a drop in the bucket compared to needs. I know there were a couple of other bills that we were working and following that unfortunately didn't happen. I think there was a bill, I want to say Senator Beckettall's bill started with what, like 200 million?
Yes, and
it got cut and eventually didn't pass. And so again, huge work. to get the housing incentive fund, I think last session it was 20 million, so to go to 20 to 25 million, step in the right direction. To add this additional $1 million is important, but I see this as a space where we'll be doing a lot of work because we know it's important to you all watching. So anything else? You were the bird dog on the housing stuff. So anything else you want to add here?
Just that this fund allows us to continually look at the evolving needs. I think not just from the task force, but the needs assessment that was done by NDSU that shows the aging population and really helps legislators get a grasp on. This is just a starting point, but we're going to have to continually, evolve and look at different strategies that really meet both the need of new people coming in, but also folks wanting to move in a different direction, downsize. How do we do both? And how can the funding and the strategy really complement each other?
Yeah, absolutely. The last thing I would add is we're still working on developing it, but if you're interested in doing housing advocacy in your community, there's going to be some volunteer trainings coming up later this year. So stay tuned to the AARP North Dakota website for that opportunity. Well, let's talk about the last item on our priority list, which was also a big one. And I want to take a step back and just put this into context for folks as a reminder. If you remember last year during the election, we joined the Keep It Local Coalition. There was a ballot measure that would have completely eliminated property tax. We had a lot of concerns about the impacts that would have on locally funded supports that older adults rely on: public transportation, senior community congregate meals, home delivered meals, a number of those things. And so we weren't in favor of that, but we did understand, and you all were very clear in our last survey that we did a couple of years ago, our Vital Voices survey, that property tax was a concern to you. And it's an issue we've worked on for many sessions. I mean, we've worked to strengthen the homestead credit program over a number of sessions. And so we really went into this session, understanding this issue was going to be on the table, that we needed to be a part of those discussions, but making sure that those discussions had a positive impact on older adults, but didn't threaten and didn't impact the locally provided or had minimal impacts on locally provided services. And so what I thought was a surprise, I mean, to me, the biggest surprise of the session was that it wasn't that Governor Armstrong took this on. It was that he kind of laid out his own plan that then Representative Nathy kind of picked up the mantle and shepherded it through the legislative process. But you were part of the coalition meetings last year. I mean, big, broad coalition. I don't think anybody really saw that till it happened. And that bill quickly became the focal point. House Bill 1176, which was the governor's property tax relief, and he would say relief and reform proposal as part of it. I do want to make sure I point out there were other bills that we were watching and tracking. I mean, at one point in time, I think we had 22 bills on the property tax tracking list that we had. There were really 3, but the one that we always kind of knew was going to be the vehicle was this 1176. We don't have time to get into the route that this traveled. I mean, this bill took the scenic route of scenic routes. It is not the most conference committees I've ever seen on a bill. It's not the longest route I've ever seen on a bill take, but it certainly was well traveled, I guess, is the way I would frame it. And I think there's a couple of big highlights from 1176 that we weighed in on that we think are really important. The first of which is it increased the primary residence credit from $500 to $1,600. So it more than tripled the primary residence credit. I actually think it ended up at $1,550 is where it ultimately ended up. They lowered it just last second on that. But the primary residence credit more than tripled. That's the credit that gets applied to your identified primary residence. You have to apply through the North Dakota Tax Department. That deadline has already passed, but when it comes open, we'll do our best to make sure folks are aware of how they can apply, declare a primary residence, and collect that credit. That is going to be a huge impact. And the good thing about how they structured that credit is everybody gets the same amount, whether you live in a small rural home or a large urban home, and that those that could benefit more because they're likely in a low income category, they get that full 16 or 1550 credit and whatnot. In addition, we heard loudly and clearly from those watching, renters needed some help and some relief. And so under the existing homestead property tax credit program, which is different than the primary residence credit program, there is a renters relief section. Under that renters relief, that number had been at $400, excuse me, for a year for years, for as long back as I can remember and look at. And that got increased finally this session from $400 to $600 as a part of House Bill 1176. I think there are a lot of other facets to 1176 that we're not going to get into because we didn't have positions on those parts of the bill. We didn't really engage on those parts of the bill, but there are a number of other pieces. But those two were really big efforts for older adults and impacting older adults. I do want to mention something because there have been a couple of questions and a little bit of confusion about this. The homestead property tax credit program still exists. We were trying to get the homestead property tax credit program expanded as part of 1176. Unfortunately, we weren't able to get that in as part of the final package. However, not having it allowed the primary residence credit to go up a little bit more. These are some of the trade-offs you make as you go through the process. But the homestead property tax credit exists. Yeah. It still exists. It did not go away. And it still applies for individuals age 65 and older or who are permanently disabled with an income of $40,000 or less, could be eligible for up to 100% of the taxable value of a homestead. There is a cap on that, which is equal to about $2,000 of property tax. What's not on the slide is you can also have up to $70,000 and still be up to a 50% taxable valuation. So when you take that program, for those that would qualify for the homestead program, and couple it with the primary residence credit, low-income older adults should, in most instances, especially if their incomes are meeting the thresholds for the homestead, see their property taxes almost entirely eliminated. We don't have the charts or the ability to show the charts and the scenarios, but as the person who was tracking this looked at those very closely and made sure, okay, yes, we still would like you to see the homestead property tax credit program expanded, but if you're not going to do it, making sure that we're still going to see that relief impact those older adults, especially with low incomes, many of them probably with fixed incomes, relying on Social Security and some of those items for a large part of their income, seeing that reduced. And so I think it was important as part of our talk today to just remind folks the homestead property tax credit program exists. You can learn more at tax.nd.gov. I'm jumping ahead a little bit just because I know there's a question in the Q&A that I see in there. The same form that you would use to qualify for the homestead property tax credit exemption as an owner has all of the renters stuff as well about how those qualifications would work and how you would apply for that as well. So tax.nd.gov is where you can learn more about those programs. I've talked a lot in a long time on property tax. Anything you want to say on the property tax stuff?
But you can see why we work as a team.
Yes.
Because property taxes, it really is within your wheelhouse. And it's a very complicated issue, but I think what was important was the same coalition that we worked with Keep It Local carried that work forward into the legislature. Did we always agree on all of the positions that maybe our partners at the cities or the counties or the schools? No, but we all knew that relief was important. And that's where it was like the band was back in town. We were always at the Capitol together. We carried that forward but I think that was what we heard during Measure 4. And I think resoundingly, we were able to say, relief is where you want to focus your efforts, legislatures. And that's how we really banded together. But like you said, it's so nuanced and there are so many, but we knew that property taxes are such an essential part of city and county budgets and provide the services that people want and need. And they don't want that to go away. They just wanted relief on their property taxes.
I'm excited to see how this works out. And again, I would just a nudge to everybody. The homestead property tax credit program technically has a deadline. I will tell you from previous life and a previous experiences, even if this is not true of the primary residence credit, you had to apply by that deadline. The homestead credit, I would still encourage you to go find the forms and apply. Oftentimes, local governments will still allow you to use that program. If nothing else, you'll have the application in for the next year. as part of it.